In the distant future, with aerospace fighters, walking battle tanks, lasers, and particle projection cannons, one would imagine that the comparatively mundane simply does not exist. But as this vehicle series so far has proven, this is not actually the case. Armored fighting vehicles have not disappeared, and neither have helicopters. More amusingly yet, while the term VTOL is often used to describe them, most of these units within this family of vehicles are just helicopters. And amongst them, perhaps the most numerous and notable, is the subject of today's video. A product of Lockheed CBM, the manufacturer which proves that the military-industrial complex is in fact eternal. This video is going to cover the ubiquitous Warrior. A VTOL weighing in at approximately 20 tons, the Warrior attack helicopter, despite being seen quite frequently, is a relatively recent arrival to the battlefields of the inner sphere. While many designs, either in the form of mechs or battle tanks, have persisted in one form or another for literally centuries, the H-7 Warrior, the first of its series to reach mass production, was released for purchase by Lockheed in 2950. An interesting design note to delve into first, regarding its locomotion and physical properties, comes in the form of its counter-rotating helicopter blade system. Because it does this, it lacks a tail rotor blade. This light attack craft was built for speed and maneuvering more than anything else, even in the technologically primitive era of the Succession Wars, and it finds an enormous amount of value in this property. It was primarily built in its original form for the Lyran Commonwealth, as it was built on Farillo of the Lyran Commonwealth, and out of hand this state seemed to reject the VTOL at its inception. When it first appeared for sale in the 2950s, the Warrior and other lighter assets were viewed with a little interest. Though, as things typically go, war can change a military's opinion rather quickly, and by 2957, the LCAF would begin making procurements of this, quote, flying toy, unquote. This term was given to the Warrior by some of the ignorant generals of House Steiner. These procurements grew, and later, due to their success within the LCAF, they would begin to be found in mercenary units, and being sold into the Periphery, and eventually even to other great houses. The Warrior would find its home in every single region of the inner sphere, and some may begin to ask why. On paper, especially, the H-7 doesn't appear particularly impressive. Even I, someone who dislikes its primary armament, will admit it has a fantastic and frustrating role on the battlefield. In essence, in its base configuration, the variant which allowed it to pour over the inner sphere like water surging and overflowing past a dam, the H-7 Warrior can be used in a series of vital roles. First, it can perform recon activities, and in many cases it can be used as a substitute for light mechs in this space, which is one of the many reasons why the LCAF procured it in the first place. On top of this, the H-7 is also fantastically inexpensive, relatively, for what it does as well. But truthfully, the H-7 proved itself to be a fantastic harassment asset, attacking from extreme distances without entering the engagement ranges of their adversaries. This more or less means that the Warrior could dissuade light mechs in an anti-recon role, or they can harry heavier mechs in vital engagements, making these an extremely valuable battlefield asset. Unfortunately, in typical Steiner tradition, the Warrior was, during the Succession Wars, often deployed haphazardly to close ranges, acting almost as an aerial tank force and being used to directly engage enemy mech forces. This, as you can imagine for a light VTOL with no real armored protection, ended as you might think, with the destruction of the aircraft and the death of its pilot. Unfortunately, it wasn't impossible to see this behavior by other commanders from outside as well, whether they be mercenary commands, periphery generals, or other great houses. Inevitably, the truth is, if you use the weapon you have to hand incorrectly, you will get the results you deserve. All the same, it would spread to the other states of the inner sphere as mentioned prior, and new variants would be developed with time and technology. It would be re-equipped to fight the clan invasion, further wars in the inner sphere, the Dark Ages, and eventually the Ilclan era. The warrior is an unexpectedly vicious adversary, and many who only play Mechwarrior, but transition to the tabletop, will quickly discover this. Because while Mechwarrior 5 uses these as more or less cannon fodder, a force with well-operated warrior helicopters can make the difference for one side winning or facing utter defeat. Being a basic VTOL aircraft, the Warrior in its first playable incarnation, the H7, doesn't have a terrible number of noteworthy structural features. To start with, as a vehicle, it has a single crew member, the pilot, and that's it. As a vehicle with an ICE engine, it doesn't come with any heat sinks. It comes with standard control equipment, as it's a product of the Inner Sphere's Succession Wars, and has standard lift equipment as well, with the former weighing 1.5 tons and the latter weighing 2.5 tons of this 21-ton frame. An odd chassis weight for the setting and in-game, I should add. The baseline H7 doesn't appear to have any quirks that I was able to find, at least in its H-series models. Helicopters are incredibly reliant on movement, and as a result the H7 needs an engine that can carry it through the air at a relatively fast pace. To make this happen, the Warrior is powered by an Omni 50 internal combustion engine. This engine weighs 3 tons, which allows for the Warrior to have a great deal of mobility, and its relatively lightweight leaves behind more than reasonable amounts of weight for additional weapon systems. Most importantly, the H7 is able to move at flank at a staggering 151 km per hour, or 14 movement points in the tabletop game. This is both its offense and its defense, truly. With this level of movement, at the time of the Succession Wars, it can stay outside of the effective threat radiuses of almost any enemy, while using its long-distance weapon to maximum effect on the battlefield. Also, because of its speed, it can be intensely hard to hit, whether it's moving at a lower speed or at full motion. It also benefits from being harder to hit just in general from being a VTOL, which also grants it the ability to change its elevation as well. This gives you the ability to reposition for optimal attack angles too. Inevitably, the engine is the single most important part of the machine. Movement is important for tanks and mechs, most assuredly, but it cannot be overstated just how important it is to helicopters and other aircraft. It's almost hard to quantify how little protection the Warrior has. It has 1.5 tons of standard plating, amounting to 24 points of armor on the entire aircraft. On its front, it has a total of 6 points of armor, to give perspective. What this means is, should the Warrior be hit by any force greater than a medium laser, it will probably be destroyed. Even 2 medium laser hits will amount in the destruction of the vehicle. This is why its mobility is so important, as it can either stay out of the line of fire altogether, which is the wisest move, or it can move fast enough that there is a hope that it won't be destroyed outright in an engagement. Should it end up not using its speed to the fullest, and enter into a threat radius of an enemy, whether it be a tank, mech, or another VTOL, the H7 will almost assuredly be destroyed. But with all of this talk of poor defenses and reliance on speed, one would think the Warrior must be pretty bad. And in some ways, that can be true. But the reality is something different, because it might be the best platform to have ever received what is normally a terrible weapon system. Armed with only 2 systems as a whole because of its light weight, the Warrior has as its primary weapon a Sarlon AC-2 autocannon mounted in the front of the craft. This gives it an enormous attack distance of up to 25 hexes. It will outrange LRM systems, and has 45 rounds of continuous fire if needed. While this weapon is very weak, and not the lightest, this is actually a great fit for the Warrior. For ground-based platforms, they often can't move fast enough to avoid being engaged when deploying this controversial weapon. A Vulcan, for instance, moves 97 km per hour, and it will be tracked down and engaged, with the gun offering very little protection in a straight-up fight. But the Warrior moves faster than a Locust. Even the fastest mechs of the era of its introduction cannot corner the Warrior and cannot keep up with it as a result. This means that the Warrior, in most conditions, can choose where the fight takes place, and can simply stay at the optimal range for its cannon throughout the battle, slowly plinking away at the target until it's been hindered, destroyed, or disabled. The Warrior, in essence, can provide a constant stream of harassment fire against targets, depending on what they are, choosing the best range for itself before engaging. If done correctly, there will be no return fire against it. It will coast through an engagement and simply batter a target the whole time, looking for through armor criticals, opened armor, or lucky shots in general. For close range attacks, which is very much somewhere it should never want to be, the Warrior is outfitted with a weapon of last resort, which is a Tharhes 4-pack SRM-4. It's an SRM-4 with 1 ton of ammunition. It's not particularly impressive, and once it's entangled with any real opposition, at this system's ranges, the Warrior is likely doomed, unless it's completely ignored. The Warrior is a fantastic craft. Ironically, it combines two things most people would assume aren't as useful as they really are. It's a lightweight VTOL with almost no armor, but it has speed. It then combines itself with a small autocannon, one which is normally derided, and rightly so, to allow it to exploit a true niche for itself. The Warrior is a secretly brilliant war machine and should never be underestimated for its ability to harry, undermine, and deplete enemy forces. It is a wildly successful craft for a reason. The Warrior chassis would be utilized in a wide series of additional configurations over its history, all of which have a huge variance in terms of their usability and functionality. All the same, I will be covering several of these in this video, as we look at the alternative models and advancements. The H7 series of Warriors in particular has a number of configurations which have appeared over the last 2 centuries. I'll be summarizing all of them here, simply because there are only a few changes to each. First, the H7A transforms the craft into something with a harder punch, but at the cost of range, which is funnily enough surely a disaster. Replacing its SRMs with 2 machine guns, it installs an AC-5 instead of an AC-2 with the freed weight. The problem is, this reduces its combat effective distance by almost 1/3 down to 18 hexes. What does this mean? This means that to attack most targets it has to come inside of LRM or AC-5 or PPC range. While it does hit harder, which is a virtue, any exposure to enemy guns is extremely hazardous to the H7A. In fact, it's more or less always lethal. The 7C, on the other hand, replaces out the autocannon for an LRM-10 rack with 2 tons of ammunition. This gives it still an incredibly generous range, and it gives it the distance that it most likely won't be knocked out by anything that isn't an LRM system from ground vehicles, as well as giving it the virtue of hitting harder. It's a great compromise overall, even at the slight cost of survivability. Finally, the latest variant, one from the Ilclan era, is the H7F, which is now powered by a fuel cell engine. It mounts an AC-2 autocannon on board, letting it have an increased rate of fire, and letting it hit multiple locations, all while still maintaining a vicious range. Next, it has a tag for marking targets, and twin one-shot SRM-2s. If that wasn't enough, it also significantly improves its armored protection, giving it 35 points of external plating overall due to its ferrofibrous quality. Of the 7 series, the F is clearly the most capable, and is a fantastic scout and harasser, even in the Ilclan era. First appearing in 3048, the H8 uses technology from the Helm memory core. This model would be displayed in Technical Readout 3058. It uses a Lockheed 70 microfusion power plant, which is ranked as a 105 fusion engine. This increases its speed to 162 km per hour, and its engine weight is sized up to 5.5 tons. Its control equipment is 1 ton, and its lift equipment is down to 2 tons. On top of that, it has a more substantial 44 points of armored plating due to 2.5 tons of ferrofibrous armor. For weaponry, it has an LRM-5 with 1 ton of ammunition and 2 SRM-2 streaks with 1 ton of ammunition between the two. While this version of the VTOL is wildly more sophisticated than almost any version of the H7 model, including the H7S, it is questionable if it's worth the additional cost of manufacturing, given how it changes its role very little, but shortens its range once more by making it reliant on LRMs for long-range support, all while not hitting as hard as the H7C with its LRM-10. The H7C also being substantially cheaper and using a fuel-based engine rather than a fusion-based engine. The best advantage the H-8 has is that it is significantly more armored, being able to take a higher quantity of damage from the front before being destroyed for its weight. But is it worth it? It's hard to know, truthfully. It can be said, though, that the H-8, if used correctly and in a harassment role, can still perform quite well, and its 2 SRM-2 streaks can allow it to duel more easily at close range with light vehicles and light battle mechs, or even allowing it to act as a backstabber if necessary against heavier targets. But to answer if it's worth it, that is a question I leave up to you, its potential future operators. The most expensive warrior ever built, the H-9, is a late 31st century model of the craft, and it is known for doubling down on fusion technology, and moves slightly slower than the H-8, going back to 154 km per hour like the H-7. It installs an XL engine in order to achieve more weight for its primary weapon, and that is its only weapon, because it has a rotary AC-2 autocannon. With only 1 ton of ammunition, it may not be a long-term presence on the battlefield either, but this is a vicious bite for such a small craft. The real problem it has? It is enormously expensive with an XL engine strategically, and tactically, it's almost 500 battle value, even in-game. Still, speed and firepower combined create an exceptionally dangerous VTOL, but the shorter range of the rotary cannon does mean that it will be exposed to more enemy fire, and may be destroyed, despite having a much stronger sting. The Warrior is an appropriate name for the H-series of attack helicopters, it turns out. While yes, there are variants that perhaps put themselves at greater risk for limited reward, or these are variants that increase their cost significantly while not delivering for their new value. As a whole, these are smartly designed standoff craft that can recon ahead of mainline AFV and battle mech formations, and can harry targets and exploit weaknesses through their use of their extreme mobility. The Warrior, in the hands of a wise commander, will provide more than its value, even if it doesn't knock out multiple targets. It is a thoroughly competent design, and one which can deliver results consistently for its weight and role. Mechwarrior 5 doesn't do it justice in this respect, as only a fool would send these to attack a battle mech at close range. These vehicle videos I've produced recently are to celebrate the new Mercenaries Kickstarter, and the Warrior is one of the main vehicles to appear in one of the upcoming plastic box sets, which are a part of it. The set it is in is called Recon and Hunter, which is where the Warrior helicopter will appear alongside the Behemoth and Ontos heavy tanks, as well as the Skulker wheeled scout tank. I'd recommend checking out the Mercenaries Kickstarter, which as of the time of making this video has around 2 weeks remaining in it. Recon and Hunter, as well as the Warrior, are the thing I'm personally most interested in, and there is a reason for that. A link to the Kickstarter will be in the description below. Aim for the cockpit, kill the meat, save the metal. And with that, thank you for joining me here today. If you've enjoyed this video, please remember to hit the like button, it does help. Also, if you want to see more of what I do, the subscribe button and bell will keep you in the know. I do my best to update frequently, and you'll be happy with the content, I think. Also, if you want to support what I do here further, have you considered becoming a channel member? When you hit the join button, you take an extra step in supporting what I do, and I can't thank you enough, because this is really only made possible because of viewers like you. And with all of that said, I'll catch you all in the comment section below.